When learning a language, speaking seems to be the most highly valued skill. In English and many other languages, when we talk about our language skills, we don't say I read or I write, not even I understand, at least not as often. We say I speak that language. Ironically, speaking is also one of the hardest skills to master, which is why if you go on YouTube and look up something like how to start speaking a language, you'll find tons of videos which have hundreds of thousands of views. But what I want to do today is a little different. Instead of telling you how you can overcome your fear of speaking and start speaking the language you are learning fluently, I want to ask the question if it's even necessary to speak a language you are learning. So here's the thing. I personally think that being able to read, write in a language, understand it, and speak is great. It's like being a millionaire, you know? You can do a lot with the money or with the skills if we're talking about languages. But does that mean that to be happy and fulfilled, you have to have millions? I think the answer is no, for all kinds of reasons. And not to make this video all about myself and my reasons not to speak some of the languages that I'm learning, I wanted to ask you guys why you would choose to learn a language without necessarily focusing on speaking, and how you have benefited from speaking a language without actually speaking it. So reason number one is you might just not be interested in the benefits that speaking a language has to offer. Of course, you can do so much more with speaking. I, for one, would not be able to make this video if I didn't speak English. But then again, not everyone wants to make videos on YouTube or travel, which is also a privilege that is not available to everyone, or even making online friends. Like, it might just not be your thing. Let's look at what the comments are saying. Gregory, for example, says, "For my Japanese studies, my goal is to for sure just consume books in Japanese." That's it. And then Misty says, "As a calligrapher, writing has always been the most interesting and important part of language learning for me. Reading and listening are equally important after that because my main goal is to read and understand media in other languages, like articles, TV, and movies." Also, how convenient for me that you guys mentioned watching TV in your target language as one of your goals, because that makes a perfect segue to introducing today's sponsor, LingoPie. LingoPie is an online video platform made specifically with language learners in mind. Here you'll find movies, shows, documentaries, podcasts, and audiobooks in Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Korean, Japanese, German, and Russian. That's a lot of languages. What makes LingoPie so great for language learning is their interactive subtitles, which basically allow you to click on a word or a phrase that you don't know and see the translation right away. All of the words you click on will be automatically saved to your collection, and you can later review them as flashcards or test yourself by taking a quiz. And they recently rolled out the most exciting update. There's now a LingoPie extension for Chrome that you can use to watch shows on Netflix with LingoPie's interactive subtitles. That means that just like on LingoPie, you can now translate, save, and practice new words and phrases, but from your favorite Netflix shows. If you want to try LingoPie for free, you can use their 7-day trial. And if later you do decide that you want to go ahead and get a subscription, the link in the description box will give you a 55% discount. Reason number 2, learning languages can be beneficial even if you don't speak them. Language learning has multiple benefits, from improving our cognitive skills, and here's a comment that describes it really well. The benefits of learning a language are incredible, even if you're only learning how to read and write. I've learned how to solve problems on my own, my memory has gotten better, even my confidence has increased after learning just a few concepts that were new to me. My understanding of the world around me has changed so much. Another huge thing is that being able to understand another language can give you access to so much more information than just what is available in your mother tongue. And that doesn't have to be just entertainment. It can also be work, education, or self-development purposes. For example, here's what my friend Azro says about French. "I like geopolitics, and there's a lot of information about African geopolitics in French, so this has been quite valuable to me. I'm now able to consume a lot of content on it. With English, I didn't speak as well during a long time. My silent phase lasted many years, but I was able to learn a lot of programming with that knowledge already. And I think here he touches on two important points. First of all, there might just be certain areas of knowledge where there's a lot more information available in a certain language. And so if you're interested in that area, even without speaking, you can get a lot of benefits from being able to understand the language. And there's another comment that says something similar. I study 19th century European diplomacy and need to read in multiple languages for my studies. Not all sources have been translated into English. And then the second point that he mentions, I think, is also really important, and it's using languages to gain knowledge that you can potentially monetize. I know a lot of people in Russia who have decent levels of reading, listening, and even writing, but their speaking is anywhere from not so great to non-existent. And guess what? They have jobs where they extensively use English, especially for research, and there's never been a situation where they actually have to speak it. Some of you, and I guess this is especially true for people who learned English as a foreign language, also expressed the same sentiment. For example, here's what this commenter says. It helped me with research. I started learning English in my teenage years, and it really opened a lot of doors because there's so much information out there in English. And honestly, same. Reason number 3, you might want to decide to prioritize your comfort and sometimes even safety. There can be a lot of different reasons why interacting with people from a certain culture might be challenging. It might have to do with things like gender, sexuality, ethnicity, because let's be honest, in some countries or cultures, you might feel more welcome than in others, depending on your identity. My country, for one, is infamous for having anti-LGBTQ plus laws. Of course, that's not to say that everyone from a certain culture will be racist, sexist, or homophobic. That's certainly not true, but it's also your right to choose to avoid potential negative experiences. I don't even think it has to be an explicitly bad experience. If so many people learn a language to sort of bond with people from other cultures and find this sense of community and belonging, it also kind of makes sense that we might feel demotivated if we know that that sense of belonging is not really in the picture for us. Here's what one commenter said, for example. It may seem like a weird reason, but the reason why I focus on French speaking but not Japanese is that I know that no matter how good I get at speaking in Japanese, even if I was absolutely perfect, I'm still going to be seen and treated like a foreigner if I were to ever live in Japan. It doesn't matter too much really, but it's a bit demotivating to think about. I can kind of relate to this experience. One of the reasons why I left Korea was because I felt like I didn't really want to live in a place where I will always be looked at as a foreigner, if that makes sense. I'm white, so I can't really complain about racism, but living in a country and being visibly foreign, Korea is an extremely monoethnic country, is an interesting experience. But another situation in which you might want to prioritize your own comfort that has nothing to do with native speakers of the language is, for example, social anxiety, which is something that several of you have mentioned. For example, Sassy Studies says this: learning the language is like assembling a puzzle, and I'm more interested in that process than in speaking, which as an introvert, I don't even enjoy in my native language. It's interesting because a lot of commenters mention that being shy or socially anxious in their own language. There's this one, for example: sometimes I wish that I was not such an introverted person and I could talk in other languages without feeling ashamed. Maybe that is the reason why I'm okay with just understanding languages, so I don't have to get out of my comfort zone. For me personally, I have to be honest, social anxiety is the number one reason why I do not focus on speaking as much. I often have a hard time talking to people even in my mother tongue. For example, back when I lived in Moscow, whenever I would go out with my friends to a restaurant, I would always ask one of them to order for me. So doing things that already bring me a lot of stress, even in my mother tongue, but doing them in a language that I don't speak nearly as well as my native language, would cause me double, if not triple anxiety. And even in situations where there's no other choice but to speak, I rarely find myself feeling that sense of accomplishment after. I'm much more likely to replay the conversation that I just had in my head, thinking about all the things that I said wrong or all the times I didn't understand something. Now that we've discussed some of the reasons you might not want to prioritize speaking, let's also talk about why not focusing on speaking doesn't really mean completely discarding it. Unless you're learning a language for school, work, or moving, I feel like you're free to choose when or how well you should speak. So let's look at this situation first. You might not need to speak a language right now, but you can always change your mind later. Even if you're not actively practicing speaking at the moment, if you meet someone who speaks the language that you're studying, or maybe you decide to visit the country, you can start working on your speaking skills and improve them. And the most important thing is that you're not going to be starting from scratch. Yes, to speak well, most of the time you need to practice specifically speaking. But the time that you've spent in contact with a language will not be wasted. And here's what Martina says. I find that not outputting early has not prevented me from speaking or writing well when I eventually needed to. Moreover, in the languages that I actually tried or had to use from the very beginning, like English, I found myself having to go back and fix the bad habits that I had picked up from outputting early. Situation number 2, you might also choose to speak some of your languages and not others. Here's what people are saying in the comments. I am learning both French and Japanese, and while I practice speaking for French, I have no interest in taking my Japanese speaking to a higher level. Another commenter says, true for the latest language I'm learning. I have 3. 1, I need to get better at speaking and taking it to a high level. The second as well, but it's not as important or urgent. And third is purely recreational. I don't really care to become fluent in speaking, just want to watch dramas and read books. And I also think I mentioned it in my video about how I am learning 6 languages. And there I talk a little bit in more detail about how your goals for each of your languages do not have to be the same. They can be if you want, but they don't have to be. And then situation number 3, what you can always do is decide that you're okay with your speaking not being as good as your other skills. Even in our native languages, we most of the time, unless we specifically train a certain skill, are better at perceptive skills than at speech production skills, whether it's writing or speaking. So it's only natural that it's the same in foreign languages. Again, if you think about your own situation and your life and the kind of things that you do, the hobbies that you have, the people that you talk to, does speaking actually have such a big part in your life that you actually need to improve it to the same extent as, let's say, your listening or reading skills? And here's another comment that I totally agree with. I have a big interest in watching French documentaries and reading French books, so obviously speaking isn't a factor here. And if you think about it, watching documentaries and reading books probably requires at least B2, if not a higher level. And then for speaking, they say I have an A to B1 level of French speaking. That's more than good enough for me when I'm traveling, so I don't really see much need to improve. So here's the thing though, even if you logically understand that speaking is not a priority for you right now or ever, it's up to you, you might still feel the pressure to speak. I've already mentioned how the word speak in many languages is a synonym for language ability, but that's only one symptom of a bigger issue. When I made my first video on this channel, I mentioned how speaking is never really my main priority when it comes to learning languages, and I got so many comments from people who felt the same way, but were discouraged by constantly seeing YouTube polyglots and language learners whose main focus was speaking. And I can totally relate. This is not to say that those YouTubers are doing something wrong, of course not, but because you almost exclusively see people whose main goal when it comes to learning languages is to communicate with native speakers, at some point you start feeling like there's something wrong with you, or like you should be doing that too. And I think more often than not, it also has to do with what we think other people's expectations of us are. When I first came up with this video idea, I remember a conversation that I overheard between 2 of my friends. One of them is a really, really talented artist, but besides that, she's also really good at singing, and I think she plays a couple of instruments. So one time my other friend told her that she felt bad because she did not have any talents, to which my artist friend told her, look, it's not that I'm better than other people, it's just that the skills I have are really, really easy to show. If she told someone she was an artist, they could say something like, oh, can you show me your work? And then she has her sketchbooks and she has her Instagram account, and people can see how good she is at what she does. Also, because this was happening in Korea, we would often have karaoke nights, and whenever we would go out together, you could definitely tell that she was a really, really good singer. And in that sense, she was right. Her talents were extremely easy to demonstrate to other people. And then there's a lot of other things that people can be good at, but they're not as easy to show. So if I tell people that I spend a lot of my free time learning languages, there's a chance that they will expect some sort of demonstration. And speaking is the easiest way to do it. Usually my main goals for learning a language are watching shows, listening to music, and reading books. But it's not like I'm gonna take a book out of my bag and start reading it to that person to impress them. Even when I was a kid and my parents signed me up for English classes, whenever their friends would find out, they would always ask me to say something. And mind you, none of those friends even spoke English. I don't really know why they would ask that, but that was kind of just the expectation that you had to speak. So in that sense, I think it's really helpful to ask yourself, is speaking something that I want, or is it something that I feel like I need to get good at so that I can impress other people, or at least not disappoint them? And mind you, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to impress people or not wanting to disappoint someone. I think it's our human nature. But at the same time, I think it's just good to be aware of what goals are actually your goals and which goals were imposed on you by sort of societal expectations. So yes, I do understand why a lot of us, myself included, might often think that speaking is a must, but it's not. And I hope that this video reminded you of that. At the same time, don't take this as me telling you to forget about speaking. Rather, take this video as a permission to not speak, to start speaking later, to only speak some of your languages and not others, to have a lower level of speaking compared to reading or listening or even writing, and so on. Whatever you choose is absolutely valid. I always say that language learning is already challenging enough, and if you're doing that as a hobby, there's absolutely no need to add more stress to your life. So be easy on yourself, stop comparing yourself to other people, focus on your achievements, and enjoy learning languages. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye bye!